Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay at our studio at the McClatchy offices in Washington, D.C. Do American consumers need protection from predatory lending practices? Also say consumer activists, and so says the Obama administration. Legislation towards that end is moving its way through Congress. To help us understand where it's at and why we need it, we're joined by Kevin Hall. He's the national economics correspondent for McClatchy Newspapers. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So why do we need it, and where's this legislation at?
Well, consumer lending or predatory lending was a big factor in why we got into the financial mess we're in. Weakened lending standards, no-doc loans, a range of bad lending practices.
Give one example people can understand.
Where a consumer didn't have to show any sort of proof of income, any sort of documentation of any source of income, and was still able to get a loan. That's one of the more egregious examples that were towards the end of what brought us the housing crisis, when the housing boom. So the idea is a consumer finance protection agency would be created to govern not just mortgage lending, but virtually any sort of lending that involves consumer credit, mortgages, credit cards, car loans, payday loans, and a range of things.
So this would make something like what you call teaser rates, like a really low rate to get you in, and then up the rate which you can't pay later. This would regulate all of that.
It would regulate. To the degree to which it would regulate is not clear. It's not clear this agency would necessarily ban practices, but it would certainly require a lot more transparency. They would have a lot more function in terms of the kind of advertising you do. So if you're going to have this, you have to have disclosures right up the front. You have to have a chart that explains this is what you'd pay each year, and if interest rates went up to 10% after that 2-year period, this is what you'd pay. Well, much more disclosure.
Well, given the meltdown and the crisis, it seems a no-brainer to have this type of regulation. But behind you we have Chris Dodd's photograph. Now, Dodd's chair of the Banking Committee in the Senate. What's his role in all of this, and what's controversial about this?
He's trying. It does seem a no-brainer for a lot of average Americans, and the polls show that. And it's become a politically charged issue. You're starting to get a lot more advertising on both sides of this. The banks and the Chamber of Commerce are very against this. They feel that it's going to add costs to them that they'll have to pass on to consumers. So
let's just say again, this is an independent agency.
It would be an independent agency. As in the House bill, it's already passed the House of Representatives. It would be a standalone consumer finance protection agency funded through fees on bank transactions or other sources of income. Dodd is leading negotiations in the Senate, where it's been a much more difficult road to hoe. He's trying to get consensus. So the Senate had seemed to be moving off this idea of a standalone agency. That seemed to be the compromise. We'll put it at the Federal Reserve, we'll put it at the Treasury, we'll put it at the FDIC. Different ideas have been bandied about where they might house it, but those are fights over the address. The big fight is going to be the scope of its powers, and they haven't even begun that fight.
But doesn't the address matter in the sense of whether it's independent or not matters? Because if it's not independent, are you giving this agency or regulatory authority back to the same regulatory regime that failed in the first place?
Well, I think the Republican argument has been you can't separate safety and soundness from consumer protection. They're part and parcel. They have to be done by the same agency. I think the record is pretty clear that these agencies fell down on the job. The question is, should they be given a second chance, or should a new standalone entity be created?
So the question comes down to, is it independent with real teeth, or is it kind of folded into a kind of mass of regulatory authority, which was never very effective? And so where's Dodd in all this? Because there's been a lot of critique that Dodd's actually been part of watering all this down.
Well, Dodd has certainly been part and parcel to a lot of this process. In the crisis, he was running in 2006, 2007, when the housing crisis was in full bloom. He was running for president, and so he's taken a lot of heat for not holding the hearings, not doing the tough work in that period, because he was obviously collecting campaign contributions from the very people at the heart of this. Now he's facing a tough re-election battle. He's decided after many, many years he's not going to seek re-election. So there are two different theories. One theory is he's now free to vote his conscience to do the right thing, or now there's less consequence for being beholden. We still haven't seen a bill. Another complication is the health care debate. He's been integral with Kennedy's death in the Senate. Dodd has been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, so he's also a man with a lot on his plate right now.
But is the critique of Dodd justified, that he's actually participating in watering this down?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, he's had a draft bill out since November. The House passed its bill in December. We're more than 18 months past the epicenter of September 2008 when the meltdown started. or I shouldn't say started, actually took full force. It began a year earlier than that even. But so I think he's a fair target for criticism as to why we haven't moved anything through the Senate on this. We haven't even had a bill through committee yet.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.